Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Creation Myths. I am so excited because I have a wonderful guest for tonight's show. We're finally doing the New Answers book, Chapter 7. We'll get to it. First thing is I just need to make sure YouTube is working. It seems fine on my end, but for anybody watching, if you got any issues with the sound, just let me know. Thank you all for being here tonight. Before we go any further, I want to introduce my guest. It is Dr. Maddie, whose channel is ScienceSideUp. Not as recently became a doctor, but the first time we're chatting here as Dr. Maddie. So congratulations. I'm so excited to have you here.
It's recent enough that I'll still take congratulations. I'm still baffled at how I actually finished my dissertation. I was in a fugue state for, I think, 2 years.
That is how it goes. It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So I don't know if you felt this way, but this is how I felt. And this is, from what I've been told, a fairly common thing where the entire duration of grad school, you feel like you're accomplishing basically nothing. And then at some point, your advisor says, you should defend your thesis soon. And you're like, but I haven't done anything.
But I've accomplished nothing.
But it turns out you're actually almost done at that point. And then you just have to write it all down and then you're good. And yeah, it's a very weird feeling when that person comes to you and says, you should think about when you're going to be done. And you're like, but I'm not ready. And they're like, no, you've done plenty. It's a very weird thing because it doesn't feel that way when you're doing it.
Yeah. And, oh man, today I was working on, so we're starting to work on getting a few papers published out of my dissertation. And I was working on making a figure better from what it was in my dissertation. And I was like, oh, I remember why I did the less good version in my dissertation. I couldn't figure this out.
Did you have a I'm sorry, I tried chapter? I had an I tried chapter.
I didn't have to have a whole chapter on that.
Congratulations. That's an accomplishment.
I did have a chapter that was Maddie pretending to be a civil engineer. So I do feel like I pulled the wool over my fully meteorologist committee's eyes. Like I feel like I got away with something. I don't know if I actually did, but
nice.
Anyway,
I had a whole chapter of data that just didn't work at all. It was my shortest chapter. It was chapter 3, and the whole point of the chapter was, look, I really tried. It just didn't work. I'm sorry.
I will say I did have a whole year of work that didn't end up in my dissertation. But I was able to pull out 3 different major sections.
Yeah, you just kind of
without having to. This is I pulled that civil engineering thing out of my butt in the last 6 months, and was able to do some stuff.
Well, congratulations. That is wonderful. So tell us what you've been up to, what you're thinking. Before we get into our specifics tonight, let's hear what Dr. Maddie is up to.
Okay, cool.
Or just what you want to talk about in general. Whatever. Let's just give us all the
I think most of you guys know who I am. I'm looking at the chat right now, but a little bit of my resume. So I got my bachelor's degree I double majored in math and earth, atmospheric, and planetary sciences at MIT. I then ran off and joined the Navy, where I taught nuclear physics for 4 years. I then came to the University of Oklahoma, where I got my master's and PhD in meteorology. And I specifically studied Arctic meteorology and how weather and oceans interact. And now I've moved on to a postdoc position, still at the same university, and I am now doing boundary layer meteorology, which is I have to learn Fortran, and I am working on editing a large eddy simulation for boundary layer meteorology in Fortran to include microphysics, which is basically to allow water to exist inside the model so we can make clouds. I didn't know if you knew this, Dan, but the absolute hardest thing about meteorology is Icarus. Yes, Fortran. I joke you not.
The hardest thing
The hardest thing about meteorology is that water has the absolute audacity to change phases. That jerk.
The nerve.
The
Like, come
nerve.
on. You got nitrogen over here keeping things nice and simple,
Nitrogen
right?
and oxygen are doing so good. They're just
They're just
camping
hanging.
out,
They're just hanging.
right? If
Yeah.
we had no water in our atmosphere, meteorology would be so easy. But
I can
like,
imagine that would make a lot.
I could legitimately probably code up a full numerical weather model for Mars, right? Because its atmosphere is almost entirely carbon dioxide and it has no oceans, right? I could probably do that like in my spare time in a few weeks, right? Cue meteorology being a whole field, and we're all like, I hate it. I hate water. It's the worst.
This is a good time. This is a good time for me to recommend. Maddie has a great series of videos on her channel, which I have not mentioned yet. It's Science Side Up, and it is linked down below. So you should click on that right now and hit subscribe. If for whatever reason you're watching this and you're not, do it.
Yeah.
Maddie has a great series of videos that is like an intro to basic meteorology stuff. I learned a ton from those videos, and I regretfully have forgotten some of it at this point because it was a few years ago. But I remember doing it, and Maddie did this great thing pedagogically where she would leave off the videos with questions, and then in the next video you get the answers, and it was really cool. And there was one, and I remember getting the answer right, and I was so happy. I was so proud of
I
myself.
remember that. You messaged me.
got the
Yeah, so that's
answer
my
right.
Weather 101. Those are actually like my most watched videos, which
Yeah,
I
they're
think is
great.
really great.
They're
Because
great.
they're a little 5-minute where I'm answering a specific question about weather, like what is veering and backing, what is latent heat, stuff like that. So I listen, my channel has been a little I haven't figured out exactly how to get back into doing it because of finishing my dissertation and now having a toddler. So it's been a little
that'll
busy.
do it. That'll do it.
But I love getting to come on streams
Can't
here.
confirm.
I'm looking forward to being able to get back to more of specifically those like Weather 101 videos. I really like to make that a resource and jump into other topics. But before we get into what we're talking about tonight, which is carbon-14 dating and
Answers in
magnetic
Genesis
fields
nonsense.
and
Yeah.
geophysics, answers in Genesis, not understanding geophysics is what I'm going to call the topic of tonight. I want to do a little pitch for why what Dr. Dan and I and all other of our science friends do here on the internet for debunking pseudoscience generally and young earth creationism specifically. Because guys, I live in the Sooner State. I live in Oklahoma. I was born and raised here, right? It's my home. I love it because it's my home, you know. But if you're unaware, our state superintendent, the state superintendent, which is an elected position, his name is Ryan Walters, and he is listen, I hate him, and he is bad for education. Scott Duke, I don't have to wait for someone to give me a printout, but I do have to work entirely in terminal on a Linux machine. But Fortran turns out still used for anything that's involving supercomputing. Fortran is still very much used. So only geoscientists and I think nuclear physicists care about it. Anywho. So yeah, so Ryan Walters is absolutely bonkers. And over the summer, he made an announcement that like it is being challenged, right? We're even my deeply heavily Republican supermajority state legislation is like challenging this. But he made an announcement that all public school classrooms in the state of Oklahoma shall teach from the Bible. I think it's at least starting from like 5th grade and up, right? And shall have a Bible in the classroom, shall teach from the Bible on the on penalty of losing your teaching license, right? That's the consequence. That is his stated consequence. And so recently, I got my hands on, and this was confirmed by a local news station that this is real. I'll try to drop it in chat or something later, but I'm just going to read it right now. A homework assignment, a student, and this particular student who ended up sharing this was Native American and not Christian. was an assignment they were given in their world history class. So there are 10 questions, and let me read them to you. So answer the following questions, but you must provide a source using APA style supporting your answer.
Maddie,
Okay?
Maddie,
Yeah.
do you want me to show the picture of it?
Would you go ahead and show the picture?
I will show the picture.
Yeah, because the one I sent you, I cropped. So
Give
all
me
of
a
the
second. Give me 1 second, and I will just show this picture. This is something I could have planned ahead of time, but folks,
I did just drop it to you like 10 minutes before we
that's
went
true.
live, so.
That's true. But folks, you know how this works.
Yeah.
I'm a professional.
While you're doing that, let me go ahead and start reading it.
Yeah,
So,
here we go. So
question 1. How did the world start? This is a world history class. Question 2. Who started it? 3. When did evil start, or did it always exist?
There it is.
4. Are people inherently good or evil or neither? 5. What is morality? 6. What is religion? 7. What is Christianity? 8. What does it mean to be a Christian? 9. Is God real? And 10. Is Satan real? Homework questions in a public high school world history class.
I feel like the answer key would be questionable.
Yeah. Now, I have to say, so 1, my instinct to this, right, is malicious compliance.
Yep.
So I understand this is looking for young Earth creationist answers. So I would love to give explicitly non-young Earth creationist answers with an APA style formatting to support
into Homa
answer.
12-point font with 1-inch margins. Yeah. It's just like, look, it's just like doing a dissertation anyway. You just got to follow the rules with the.
Yeah. So I actually feel like this. If there, to my knowledge, Hollyhock, there's not an answer key. And so like I would love for this native student, I don't know what tribe she is, but I would love for her to answer those first 2 or at least 3 questions with her tribe's creation myth, right? Like, and cite it, you know. I would love to, you know what I mean? Like, I would answer, when did evil start, or did it always exist? Like, oh man, I'm gonna find some philosophers, right? And specifically like non-Christian philosophers, and answer that. Same with like morality, religion. What is Christianity? Would love to give like a full atheistic definition of Christianity. What does it mean to be a Christian? I mean, like, okay, like, well, here's the history of the creeds, right? So you could, and question 10, I would love to write a full paper on the influence of Zoroastrianism on early Christianity, right? I've been listening to, let's see, way too much Diablo critics. That's what I've been listening to way too much of. So Dr. Josh Bowen and Dan McClellan and what's his name? Oh my gosh, I feel so bad. I've like played Star Trek role-playing games with him and I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, that group, right? So anyway, Kip Davis, thank you, Scott. Anywho, so I wanted to present this, and we won't spend much more time on this other than what my malicious compliance would be. But I wanted to point that out, as I am of the belief, it's my personal opinion, that Ryan Walters is trying to use Oklahoma's public education system as a proving ground for the education policies listed in Project 2025. That is fully my opinion, my own little conspiracy theory. And but that's what I think is going on. And so one of the reasons, so something that like I know Dan and I both care deeply about, rate is the value of education. We don't want to see the public education system in America eroded. I think it's our most valuable public institution, to be honest. I think education is, like, if you can give someone a good education, that is the best thing you can equip them with beyond like food, you know? Yeah. So,
And
okay, that's my little spiel.
before we get to Answers in Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
the New Answers book, chapter 7, book 1, chapter 7, before we get to that, I just want to wholeheartedly agree with all of that. Because I think it is becoming abundantly clear that even though, we do this pseudoscience stuff, oh, isn't it silly? They think the world is 6,000 years old. Yeah, it's all the same stuff as like the Christian nationalism and the banning all sorts of healthcare for women and for trans people and literally removing books from libraries, which is happening all over the state of Florida. Like, these are real things that are happening. And Maddie mentioned Project 2025. It's all in there. It's spelled out in black and white in really boring legal language. But all this stuff is in there about like rearranging society around a Christian worldview and imposing that through the schools and And like, this stuff is happening. You've maybe heard the phrase that the states are the laboratories of democracy. Well, what's going on right now in a lot of the country, and this is, I want to be clear, this is not hyperbolic to say it this way. This is not an exaggeration. States right now are the laboratories of fascism. They're testing what they can get away with at the state level so that they can impose it at the federal level if they get a chance. That's what's going on here. And like, this pseudoscience stuff is all part of that. And I want to remind everybody, if you need any clearer example of just how tightly intertwined these things are, it's that the Speaker of the House of Representatives right now has an author page with Answers in Genesis. You can go to AIG's website and find Mike Johnson as an author.
Terrifying. Ooh, did you know Project 2025 wants to fully privatize the National Weather Service? Like, get away with the National Weather Service?
Crazy.
Guys, that's a terrible idea. That means you have to pay your subscription service to get a tornado warning.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Right? That's insane. That also whether the weather community globally is doing something right in science because we all share our data with each other for free, right?
Yeah. And it's really important.
Because it's really important. Because people's lives depend on it. And also, the National Weather Service saves people billions of dollars a year and tens of thousands of lives, right?
Agriculture.
We are worth our weight in gold. Don't get away with the National Weather Service.
Yeah, this is all part of the plan. And like Maddie, talked about the state superintendent, this is becoming a politics, and this is okay because this is important. We're doing it. If you don't like it, like Maddie talks about all that stuff going on with the schools. I want to be clear, this is on purpose. Like, one of their explicitly stated goals is dismantling public education, right? That is, they don't like public education because it has to follow a set of rules, like in the Constitution that says the state cannot impose a religion, right? Well, right, if you have private schools that aren't taking federal money, you don't follow those rules, right? That's what they want for everybody. It sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory. They wrote it all down. You can Google it. I have the PDF on my computer. It's like 900 some odd pages long. It's all there in black and white, spelled out.
And it's not a crazy conspiracy theory because it's actively happening in my state right now.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And you're not the only one. Louisiana, Florida, Virginia, I'm sure others, those are the ones I can think of. Texas, of course, they're, Texas. It's scary out there, folks. And the science stuff is part of it. This is just pushing back on one front, right? Yeah. It's all part of the same thing that we're all pushing back on. So that all being said, let's talk. Let us talk about.
Let's talk about carbon-14 dating.
Let's talk about carbon-14 dating because
I'm excited.
Again, so remember, hang on, I just want to highlight a comment here. To summarize, don't buy into pseudoscience and don't vote for Trump. Damn straight. There you go. Harris Walls 2024, baby. Let's do it. I'm in. All right. So this book, again, for anyone, I know it's been a minute since I've done an installment in this series. And part of that is because I needed to make sure I did this chapter right, which means I needed somebody who knew what they're talking about. which means Maddie is here with us.
Yeah, so you reached out to me like in March, and I was
This is
like,
literally
cool,
in
cool, cool,
March,
cool, cool.
and
Writing my dissertation. Talk to you in
Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah. So, but then like I had to cancel, and then you had to cancel. We were both sick. We canceled multiple dates because one of us was sick. It was like it took a while to get here. But so this is the Answers in Genesis. It's called the New Answers book, and this is the first of 4 books. And they just like have all these questions that they're going to answer in the young Earth framework. So this question, chapter 7, is: doesn't carbon-14 dating disprove the Bible? And the author for this chapter is Mike Riddle. I don't know who that is. I maybe knew that name at one point. I do not remember who Mike Riddle is. Also, I will note, not Tom. I will also note that this book, New Answers Book 1, is pretty old. So there are some really retro arguments in this book. We're talking like 1980s vintage, like really, really old school stuff in here. So let's talk about carbon dating. Now, what I did with this chapter is I went through it and I just highlighted stuff that I'm like, either, okay, that's important to mention, like just as background, or I don't know why, but I bet that's wrong. Yeah. So as we go through, Maddie, feel free to stop at any point. It doesn't have to be highlighted. And but you know, we'll just go through and we'll look at all the nonsense in here, because it is dense with nonsense. Okay, so many people have led to believe that radiometric dating methods have proved the Earth to be billions of years old. I just want to say with that, I just want to say, and this is a little hobby horse of mine, that to the extent that you can prove anything in science, I think that's pretty much true because of Oklo specifically. Yes. Which confirms, we're not going to go into all the details, blah, 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 but anyway, you can Google it, natural nuclear reactors, one of the coolest things ever in the history of the world, basically confirms that radiometric dating, like everything is constant back to 1.8 to 2 billion years. Like straight up, it proves it to the extent you can prove anything outside of math, right? Like,
radiometric dating is, as a methodology, is like about as much as you can prove anything outside of math. It is because we get the age, like the age of the Earth and the age of the solar system, right, match up exactly using, so if we date rocks from Earth versus dating asteroids, right, something from the moon, we're getting like the same 4.5 billion years old. We get those same ages using multiple different dating methods, right? Multiple different, and so therefore independent dating methods.
Yeah, that's the important thing. The different techniques are independent of each other and they converge at the same number.
Exactly. So like they're all giving answers inside each other's error bars, right?
It's
like
really cool.
It's all clustering. And so it's, this is really good. One thing that I predict this chapter is going to do is conflate carbon-14 dating with all radiometric dating. If you want, carbon-14 dating is irrelevant to the age of the Earth, because you can only use carbon-14 dating back to an absolute maximum of 100,000 years. And really 60,000 is pretty close to its maximum usability. So
Maddie, would you say that radiometric dating is rock solid?
It is. It's rock steady. In fact, it's rock solid and rock steady.
Sorry, everybody.
It was so bad.
It's so bad. We're going to start class in a couple weeks. My students are going to have to deal with all sorts of dad jokes. I
don't understand what it is with Oklahoma, but classes started Monday for universities, right? Our semesters are too long. They are 16 weeks long, and they are too long.
That's long.
Gosh,
that's a lot. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of this chapter, at least the beginning a little bit, is just like the basics of like atomic structure and carbon and protons and neutrons. And we don't need to like belabor that point. That's fine. I do want to point out this line. There are 2 main applications for radiometric dating. One is potentially dating fossils, once living things, and the other is for dating rocks in the age of the Earth using uranium, potassium, and other atoms.
This sentence is bad.
I figured, because there are more than 2 things.
Yeah.
And You can't just lump the techniques like this one does this and these all do this.
Yeah.
That's not how it
Well,
works.
very specifically, fossils have no carbon in them because
Because
they've
they're
been mineralized.
fossilized.
They've been
They
fossilized.
don't
Yeah.
have carbon
So
left.
you would use argon dating or uranium lead dating in a fossil. So
Right.
specifically organic material, right? You can
Right.
use carbon-14 to date organic things that used to be alive that now are not, right? And you can use that to date back to when they died, right? That's what it tells
Right.
you.
And remember, this is a thing that AIG does. Like Jensen does this with his like stuff with like ancient DNA. He's like, fossil DNA. If it has DNA in it, like from Neanderthals,
It's not a
it's not
fossil.
fossilized because
Yeah.
it still has the it's not fully mineralized yet. If it's
Yeah.
a fossil, it's mineralized and there's no organic matter left. It's two different things. And like I just point that out to say that this thing that they did here,
hmm
this is something that AIG does. Even like this is old, but like
Yeah.
Jensen does this now.
Well, and there's another thing in here that I think might be a little subtle, which is it is not true that you can date any rock with a radiometric dating technique, right? If we're looking at, say, like argon, potassium, argon, uranium, lead, those are the ones that I kind of know, and carbon-14 are the ones I know off the top of my head, and they're kind of the most common. But you cannot date any rock with uranium lead dating, right? You cannot date any rock with potassium argon or argon dating. You have to be very intentional and selective about what you choose to date based off of limitations of the method, right? For like, you can't use a bathroom scale, right, to measure. So like, imagine trying to use your bathroom scale to measure your cat's weight, right? You can do it, if you have a very obedient cat. I've never had an obedient cat. But like, you're like, well, in theory, you could get the cat to like stand on it and be still. Like, that's never going to happen. You can't do it. The best you could do is like weigh yourself and then hold the cat and weigh you and the cat, right? My point there is like, how we use a tool is very specific, right? You also couldn't use your bathroom scale to weigh a bunch of loose feathers, right? Like, because it has to fit on the scale.
Or a truck.
Or a truck, yeah.
Truck.
So like even if you have something that you know to be that we think is 1 billion years old based off of other evidence.
Evolutionary assumptions, let's say.
That doesn't necessarily mean that you can date that rock with those methods. So, for example, you cannot date sedimentary rocks using this method because what you will do. So, suppose you are very cool, right, and you build a barn out of reclaimed wood, right? And the wood, was used in these other barns going all the way back to the 1600s in Pennsylvania, right? Well, if we were to use a carbon-14 dating to figure out how old your barn is, and we dated the wood, that would say that you built your barn in 1600, right? Because the pieces of a thing are not the same thing as the thing itself.
The thing, yeah.
So sedimentary rock versus dating a tree, right?
Right. So if I understand this correctly, because geology, this is not my thing, but like sedimentary rock is the compacted sediment of other things that have like dissolved in the water, or they're not dissolved, I guess, because they precipitate out and then they get compacted. So if you were to date the sedimentary rock, you're not dating when that sedimentary rock formed. You'd be dating the components of it and when those actually became isolated.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So imagine you built your barn and half of it was reclaimed wood from the 1600s and the other half was pine from Home Depot that was cut down last year, right? We would get these two really different dates if we dated the age of the wood, right? Sedimentary rock is igneous rock that is then ground up into like sediment, sand, right? And then compressed, right? If we would date when those individual granules formed, not ignoring the whole process of when they were eroded and then brought back together and then reformed into a new rock. Can't do that. So Yeah, so you've got to be careful with this because it's a common thing that AIG and other YEC groups do, which is like, well, we dated this rock and it was wrong. It's like, well, yeah, but that's not a rock that you can date, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a misapplication, in my opinion, intentional misapplication of methodology
Definitely.
is commonly used by young Earth creationists
Yes.
to confuse and lie to, in my opinion, using protective language.
I second that opinion.
Yeah, they're like followers, right?
Yeah.
Anywho.
Okay. So then we have a little bit here on carbon-14 dating, and it's just like kind of basic stuff with carbon-14 dating, how this works, but they
That first sentence is wrong.
They have to throw, here we go, for fossils, this part right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, fossils,
yeah.
50,000, 60, nope, that's wrong.
Yeah, that's wrong. So by the way, that 50 to 60,000 year old thing, that comes from the half-life of carbon-14 is about 6,000 years. Generally speaking, a good rule of thumb is that an instrument can measure concentrations of a particular material for up to 10 half-lives. So that's where you get that 50 to 60. Modern times, some labs can get carbon-14 out to 100,000 years if you have the newest, bestest tools.
If you're fancy, yeah.
Yeah.
If this claim is true, right, that we can measure accurately dates 50, 60, 80,000 years, the biblical account of a young Earth about 6,000 years is in question, since 14c dates of tens of thousands of years are common. Now, here's the line that I want to point out here.
Mm-hmm.
When a scientist's interpretation of data does not match the clear meaning text of the Bible, we should never reinterpret the Bible. And this is where you see, this is where these early AIG works are really revealing, in that they really just go full on here it is. This is we're not entertaining anything that could contradict us. And by us, I mean Ken Ham's special interpretation of the Bible. This is very much a Ken Ham production, right?
And this is, I like to say this every time, the majority of Christians, right, accept that the Earth is very old, right? The majority of Christians worldwide. And the majority of scientists, fun fact, are practice faith of one kind or another, right? And so this point of view, this young Earth creationist point of view, is an extreme fringe belief inside of Christianity, right? Young Earth creationists think that they are the only true Christians, right? And that their belief is the true belief, right? But no, they are an extremist fringe group inside of Christianity, and a far, far, far minority.
So we have 4 questions here that are important for this chapter. This is how AIG's, and I guess who is it? Dan Biddle? Who is it? Who did this?
Mike Riddle.
Mike Riddle. It was Mike Riddle. It was Riddle. Yeah, because you made the Tom Riddle joke. Yeah,
I made the Tom Riddle joke. Yeah,
thank you. I'm it was one of those. There's multiple creationists with the. So the questions that he uses to frame this is the explanation of the data derived from empirical observational science or an interpretation of past events, historical science? Now, first, this is silly. I this is not a thing. Maddie, I can't comment on your experience in your education, but I have a PhD. You know what never came up at any point in all of my years of education? The difference between historical science and observational science.
Yeah, there's no difference.
It's all the same techniques. It's the same methodologies applied in different contexts. It's the same way of
all the same things.
Learning.
Young Earth creationists, I've noticed, really, really like to think that human eyeballs watching something happen has much higher value than any other form of observation. And I find that baffling, because human eyeballs suck as a tool.
And also the brains they're connected to suck. And we know, we have data on this, that eyewitness testimony is the least reliable form of evidence. Like if you, and there have been experiments on this where they show like,
Yeah.
20 people like, here's the thing, watch the thing. And then they
Yeah.
ask them later, what did you see? And like, nobody remembers specifics of the thing. It's just,
Right.
it's chaos. But yeah, creationists love to make it like, well, were you there?
Were you
Did you see
there? Did you
that?
observe it? Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Human eyeballs, horribly unreliable.
But here's the thing. This comes down to, and I'm gonna put agency on them here.
Yeah.
Like this comes down to them misrepresenting what words mean in science. When we talk about an observation in science, it doesn't mean I watched the atoms decay. It means I can measure the relative ratios. That is an observation in science. And like I can directly measure the ratios. That is an empirical thing, right? That is observational science. And we use those observations to document a thing that happened in the past, right?
Yeah.
That is no different from me doing something on a lab bench.
There's also no difference between using like a satellite to get information about ocean temperature, right?
No, you have to drive out with a boat and put a thermometer in the ocean. That's better. That's how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah, right. But like that, yeah, this notion that those two things are different, you know?
Right.
Or that like we don't understand our measurement techniques.
Yeah. So question 2 is a great one. Question 2 is a great one. Maddie, are there any assumptions involved in the dating method?
Sure there are.
Yeah.
We assume physics works the same way.
Assume physics works.
Yeah. We would assume that globally carbon at any given time, right? Or within, so like globally we would assume that carbon-14 is at a constant ratio, right?
Yeah, well those are assumptions, and now you're wrong because you're just making assumptions.
Let's see. We assume that the atmosphere didn't used to be made of cotton candy.
How do you know that? Were you there to see it?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know the garden. You weren't in the Garden of Eden. Just because they didn't write it down doesn't mean it wasn't made of cotton candy.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, I'm being silly, but also like, come on, like this is ridiculous.
Yeah, so there's always assumptions in science.
Unless the Bible is true, and then you just go to the Bible and there's no assumptions. There's no assumptions.
The Bible can tell me the half-life of carbon-14.
It's right there. Yeah,
it's right
you just count back all the names and the ages, and there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, directly observed because it's in there.
Cool.
Okay. Are the dates provided by 14C dating consistent with what we observe? I can answer this one.
Yeah. Yes. My asterisks will be yes when the methodology is used appropriately.
When the methodology is used appropriately. And I think this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but when the methodology is used appropriately, it is extraordinarily precise to the point where we can like get the dates of specific events to the year that is documented in the historical record. It is super cool. Yeah. And then the last one, there's a really neat trick they pull on the last one here. Do all scientists accept the 14C dating method as reliable and accurate?
Listen, that is a rhetorical trick of using words like always, all, always, never, right? Words that are, what's the word? Like absolutes?
Absolutes.
Right? That's a rhetorical trick because hey, team, next time you take a standardness test, if you ever see a phrase in the question that's all or never, it's false, right? It's always false.
That's wrong.
It's wrong because it's using an absolute, right?
I will tell you, when I write exams, try really hard to avoid those in the answers. Sometimes it's hard to avoid in terms of like coming up with your distractors, but like try really hard to avoid those because it makes it really obvious that option is wrong.
Yeah. I've tried to eliminate those words from my vocabulary when I am doing science, right?
Yeah.
We do not, only a Sith deals in absolutes, and I am not a Sith.
Also not a Sith. Most scientists, not Siths.
Not Siths.
You know who's a Sith? Ken Ham.
Ken Ham's a Sith.
He's a Sith. Wait a minute. And what about Mike Riddle? Mike Riddle's was Voldemort a Sith?
Clearly. That's the only possible explanation.
Learning things. All right. So those are our framing questions for the rest of what we're going to talk about, folks. And I hope it is very clear that what's going on right here is some dishonest hackery in terms of framing the rest of what goes on in this chapter.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this page, I don't care about that page. I don't know why I didn't highlight. Oh my goodness, what is happening? Yeah, I don't know why I didn't highlight stuff here. Oh, it's just all about how decay works. It's fine. Carbon-14 is always being added to the atmosphere, and we don't have to go into the details of it, but it's, Maddie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's nitrogen absorbs the energy and it becomes carbon-14.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then here's how the process works. And this figure, you have all of this space on the page. Why? Why did you do this? You have all of this space to make it fit the page. And it's like this weird...
critiquing their formatting now?
Look, yes.
Okay.
Look, if you're going to present science with like terrible graphics like this, I'm going to like point it out, because I have a really fun show specifically on that coming up in September. I'm really pumped for it.
Amazing.
So it's going to be fun. So, what's going on? Actually, Maddie, this is like your thing. Do you want to just briefly explain what's going on in this picture?
Yeah. So
thank you.
The first picture, I think, is trying to depict...
I think it's photosynthesis. It's taking in the CO2.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I couldn't tell the directionality because it's so small. Yeah. So, okay. So nitrogen in the air. Most of our atmosphere is nitrogen, right? Nitrogen 14 gets hit with high energy EM, right? It's like a gamma, and it's panics and becomes carbon 14. And then that carbon 14 is absorbed along with carbon 12 by photosynthesis, right? So plants gobble up that carbon from the atmosphere, and now there is carbon 14 that was made in the atmosphere in the plant, and then that plant could then die, right? And then it stops uptaking carbon 14, and so any carbon 14 that was in it is going to start to decay, and it decays. It actually decays back to nitrogen. It's just like, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was doing. I'll be nitrogen again. Or that plant then gets eaten by a cow or me, right? Right. And whatever happens, right? So we're all consuming carbon that was taken from the atmosphere by plants, right, into ourselves by eating. But when we die, we stop taking in new carbon. And so the amount of carbon 14 in our body goes down, right? And so if you were to find, my remains in 2,000 years from now, right, you could say like, hey, there's not as much carbon 14 in her as there is in me right now. She must be old. She must have died a long time ago, right? Like, so it tells you when the creature died. So carbon 14 can be used to date plants that have died, or things that eat plants, or things that eat things that eat plants that have died. That's what it can be used to date. And it actually can't be used to date ocean creatures, generally speaking, and I can explain that later when they bring it up. But that's what this is depicting.
Thank you for that very clear, short explanation for what exactly is going on here. Before we move on, we get a super chat I have to highlight from Savage Dreadnought Armored Schooner Cobra for $1.99. Thank you for your generosity. All physicists are Sith. It's why they use Kelvin. Absolutely.
Makes sense.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you imagine how evil you have to be, just how unhinged to like report the temperature it is outside in Kelvin?
I confuse everybody in my life because grad school caused me to think in Celsius, and now I just I default to Celsius, and
Gotcha.
It's so like we'll be like somebody, my wife will be like, "What's the temperature today?" And I'll be like, "Oh, it's nice. It's like 22." I'll be like, "What is that in real temperature?"
What's that in real temperature? Meteorology, because there's so much of the like communication.
That's like low 70s, by the way, everybody. That's like,
meteorology, I don't actually think in Celsius, even though I probably should, right? But like we do so much.
Yeah, it's all
It's the communication side to the general public.
Fahrenheit. It has to be Fahrenheit.
So you have to do that in Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my parenting wins is that my kids know both scales because I think in Celsius. So like they'll look at, like, we'll be like getting ready to go to school and they'll be like, what let's look at the temperature today. And so be like, all right, it's it's 12. We better wear a jacket today. It'd be like, oh, what is it in Fahrenheit? What's the other number? And what they say, it's adorable. They don't know the word. Like Fahrenheit is like a big word for a
It's a
kid.
hard word, yeah.
But they know daddy's temperature and mommy's temperature because on our phones it's different. Parenting, folks. Parenting.
Yeah. So my little girl is now almost 2, and she got to pick out a book to bring to daycare to share with her friends. And the book she chose was, I kid you not, Organic Chemistry for Babies.
I love those books.
Oh, she loves specifically the organic chemistry one because it's really cute. It's like, this is a ball. This ball can stick to 2 other balls. This ball can stick to 3 other balls. And then we go from that to like carbon, right? You get there at the end.
Yeah.
But she loves it because one of her most favorite words is ball. And so we just start reading it and she goes, ball, and points.
Yeah, that's great.
At all the balls and yells awesome. Ball. So
we have a bunch of those books, and we read a lot of those books. The this for babies and that, quantum physics for babies and this for baby. Yeah, it's great.
They're so good. I love them.
There's a slightly, I know, folks, I'm sorry. Now it's just 2 parents of small children nerding out about parenting small children, but like, go with it. There's a slightly higher level of same kind of vibes where they're a little bit longer. And we have the evolution one where it's all about a girl and her chicken, and her chicken is the smallest, wimpiest animal on the farm, but it's all talking about how, like, dinosaurs, come on, be proud of who you are, because dinosaurs is really good. And the chicken's name is Darwin.
We also have I really like the ABCs of math and the ABCs of physics.
Yes,
because it has 3 different levels of complexity for every word.
We have that for space. We have the ABCs of space. It's really good. Yeah.
Okay, one more parenting thing. We took baby girl last week to see Bluey live on stage.
The best show on TV, folks.
Best show on TV.
Bluey is the best show. I can't believe we're here just nerding out about this. Is wonderful.
This is great. And she lost her little mind. She loved every second of it. It was so good. It was so good.
I cannot say enough about.
That's like the second time we've taken her to the theater. I know, the third time. And she is getting so good at her theater etiquette.
Oh, that's good.
She was kind of upset that there wasn't an intermission in this show. And the last 2 we'd been to, there was an intermission. And so when the show ended, she looked at me and did more. Because when we took her to the ballet.
Yeah, there's a break.
She was like, more? I was like, more dancing? She was like, yeah. I was like, oh, they'll be right back. Right. And this one, she was like, more? But it was the little sign.
Oh yes. Oh, that is adorable. All right, so we gotta member for 2 months. Thank you, Strawberry 5th Super Chat Vein. Never apologize for being adorable and wholesome. Thank you. We appreciate that. I will apologize for being somewhat off topic for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Sorry, we just had to
get into things we would rather talk about than YEC.
Oh man, no, we could. Yeah, you 2 parents with little kids and talk about what you do and tips and books and everything and go on all night. Okay, let's keep talking about this because there's a phrase on this page that made my head explode, and the phrase, you can read it highlighted, assumed accuracy. And this gets into another rhetorical trick that the young Earth creationists do when they talk about assumptions, because assumptions in science are not the same thing as assumptions in your everyday life, right?
Yeah.
If I assume that, I don't know, I'm just going to use an example here because, all about kids and logistics and anything. If I assume that I'm picking up my kids from school, or that my wife is picking up my kids from school, and she assumes that I'm doing it, we have a problem. Right. That's right. That's good. That's never happened, for the record. We're a lot of communication. Communication is the key, folks. Planning. But like, that is the common everyday usage of the word assumption. But in science, that's not what we mean when we say assumption, right? when we have an assumption in science, we are saying, here's the baseline we're operating with, which we're then going to evaluate, right? You're making an assumption, and then you're making predictions with those assumptions in place and seeing if it holds.
And we test those assumptions. So 2 really great examples I can throw out are that anytime you're doing like full-blown calculations, like not fluid dynamic calculations in the atmosphere, we assume gravity is constant throughout the depth of the atmosphere, right? Now, you could be like, hold on, wait a second.
That's not true.
That's not true, because gravity, acceleration due to gravity, varies with distance from the center of the Earth.
That's right.
True. However, since the thickness of the atmosphere is teeny tiny compared to the radius of the Earth, the changes of gravity from the bottom of the atmosphere to the top of the atmosphere, at least to the top of like the troposphere, right? Which is what we're worried about with weather, don't affect the calculations. And we checked, right? And that's therefore a good assumption. We also assume that the atmosphere is hydrostatic, which means its density is constant. That's objectively not true.
That's
right?
Like, I even know that, but just like weather, high pressure, low pressure, da 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 da. Like,
yeah,
it's important.
But those, assuming the density of the air to be constant, right? It only is enough to affect your calculations, right? If you have like if wind speed is approaching Mach 1.
That's fast.
Right? So like so again, we tested it, right? So like
it's
that's
fine.
an assumption, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably fine. It's probably fine to just let that one slide.
When is it a bad idea to assume that the density of the atmosphere stays the same? When you're preparing to climb Mount Everest and forget to take and use that as a reason to not bring oxygen, right? But if you're just doing math for fluid dynamics, the change in the density is small enough at normal wind speeds, that you don't reach unless you're inside of like an EF5 tornado.
I mean, that's like the wind speed that would like dissipate all the heat from a global flood. That's the kind of wind speed you're talking about there, right? That's the solution. I'm raising Maddie's blood pressure now.
You're raising my blood pressure. I'm gonna take a breath. Like there are not all storms that produce tornadoes get wind speeds high enough that hydrostatic assumption is bad, but some do. Right. Anyway,
I didn't know they actually got that. They got that fast, really?
They get fast, man. We get tornadoes.
Because the tornado's been measured at
like
300 miles per hour. How fast is the fastest ever measured? It's like 300-ish.
No, 200.
200s. Okay, that's still really fast. Okay.
That's not counting gusts, right?
Yeah, right.
Anywho, tornadoes are wild.
Yeah. This is, by the way, Maddie, I don't know if you know of the book that I want to read, or if anybody in chat knows of the book I want to read, but you're possibly the best person I know to ask about this, given your location and profession. So you may be familiar with the book Into Thin Air, about the 1990 whatever Everest, 96 or whatever Everest disaster. I want to read Into Thin Air for the El Reno tornado. I want to read that book. I don't think that book exists yet, but I want to read it. I want to read that.
Talk about the El Reno tornado like almost daily in the Weather Center.
That is the most bananas weather event that I think has ever happened. It is.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy, right, is that
I love how we're just like, let's talk about this thing. Let's talk about that thing. It's fine. We'll get to AIG, folks. We're not going to let AIG dominate our lives. This is going back to what we talked about at the beginning. This is what they want us to do.
Yeah.
We'll get there on our own time.
So the El Reno tornado is actually, it is unlikely to be the worst tornado of all time. And that's like in a tornado outbreak. What makes it special, right, is like we actually think we have had stronger tornadoes. The problem is they went through a field, right? And tornado speed, right, is not directly measured because we do not have an instrument that can survive tornadic wind speeds.
Yeah.
Right? And so tornadoes, their speed is estimated based off of damage surveys after the fact. So if you have a tornado that goes through a field and doesn't interact with anything but grass, we don't know how fast it was going. And people
Right.
are going to
And
be like, but wait, what about satellites? We do not have the ability to position a satellite that fast because
yeah,
tornadoes pop in and out of existence in minutes, right? It's not a hurricane,
yeah,
right? The
yeah.
tornado might be on the ground for 5 minutes,
Yeah,
right?
and for people, so for people who the tornado scale, the enhanced Fujita scale, I think it's the
Yeah.
Fujita, yeah, and it's so the highest is EF5, and like the standards for rating something at EF5 is where you have a concrete slab foundation with anchor bolts, and
Yeah.
it has to like bend or break the bolts, and
Yeah.
like so if you don't hit that like that's one of the damage indicators,
Yeah.
and if you never hit that kind of structure, you have no basis for assigning that rating, even if the wind speed was sufficient to do it, had it hit the structure.
Right.
It's just, yeah, it's this weird thing with tornadoes because they're short-lived and tiny in the grand scheme of things, even if the biggest ones could be a mile or more across. In the grand scheme of things, they're teeny tiny and they're very short-lived, and they pop up and, like you said, they pop up and go away really fast, so we just can't measure them. It's so weird. Tornadoes are weird. Anyway, this has
Tornadoes
been
are absolutely baffling. By the way, there's fully a lab, and I don't know, man, I would love for this to be my lab, but it will never be. There's a lab at Texas A&M, I think, that's just a wind tunnel, and their whole job is to chuck stuff at other stuff
oh man,
at high wind speeds.
Sounds great.
To help build out those damage surveys.
Yeah, that's just like, oh, we now have more things, right?
Yeah.
For yeah.
What happens when you throw a brick at 200 miles an hour at a fence, at a tree, at a house?
One more thing on this is that, and this is just like a weird piece of trivia about tornadoes that we can nerd out about this because I think it's cool, is that I forget which tornado this was, but the damage indicator that they used to assign whatever wind speed they assigned was there was an oil derrick that was tossed like over it. It lifted it off of its foundation and tossed it and rolled it. And that's one of that specific thing is one of the highest wind speed indicators because those things weigh like hundreds of tons.
Yeah.
And it just like, nope, get out of my way. Okay, we should continue talking about carbon dating.
We got distracted by assumed accuracy. All this is saying is that with better tools, we can measure smaller concentrations of carbon-14. That's all that says.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna jump ahead to some this section, which, as you can imagine, has some stuff.
Hey, that sentence is wrong.
Yeah, it is assumed that the ratio of 14C to 12C in the atmosphere has always been the same as it is today. Maddie, tell us why this is nonsense.
This is nonsense because we know that to not be true. And what we do is we've developed what's called a calibration curve, right? And so there's stuff like trees that are living, that are 5,000 years old, right? That you can go back and like measure carbon-12 to carbon-14 ratios in all of the rings, right? And then count the rings to know how old the thing is, right? And use that as a way to calibrate, to give you a baseline of carbon, like the baseline carbon-12 to carbon-14. So yeah, the amount of carbon-12 versus carbon-14 in the atmosphere does change. So it's going to change with things like how fast is carbon being inputted and uptaken from the atmosphere. We're going through like solar cycles. Is solar radiation more or less intense? That can affect things. Like there's a lot of things that affect it, right? And so yeah, we have calibration curves where we go back and we look at like things. Basically, you look at something of known age, something that you can date without carbon-14 that has carbon in it, that you then use that, look at its carbon-12 to carbon-14 ratio and get the thingamajig, get the value for what carbon-14 to carbon-12 ratio in the atmosphere would have been at that time.
When you do carbon dating, it's important to note with this, when you do carbon dating, like it doesn't spit out a year, it spits out numbers and you have to interpret those numbers. And creationists, interpreting the data. You just, no data exists in a vacuum, right? You have to interpret the data. Right. So you look at the ratios of carbon isotopes in a sample, you have to interpret that in the context of what else we know about the atmosphere and the type of sample it is and blah, 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 blah. There's other things you have to consider. And as you just explained, right, we have these independent methods of determining those other parameters, right? Tree rings are great.
Yep.
right? Use tree rings, and now you know the number of years, and now we can directly detect the carbon ratio year by year as we go back through time. And
exactly. And so we're getting out of things I know off the top of my head, but like we don't have a tree that's 100,000 years old, right? So how do we make the calibration curve going that far back in time? Farther back in time, the more error there is, and that's built into how the methodology works, right? Like, so you will get larger error bars, right? Because it doesn't give you a date, it gives you a date range, right? When you interpret all of this and calculate it appropriately, right? So like the date range you're going to get spit out for something that's more like 100,000 years old, is going to be bigger than something that's 2,000 years old, right? Because we have more data, right? We're able to be more precise with something that's 2,000 years old because we have a better calibration curve. And I know that there are other things than just tree rings that are used for the calibration curve. I forget what those are off the top of my head, though.
That's okay. You've made the point. Before we move on from this, I want to point out 2 comments because it's really cool and I actually know the answer.
Cool.
So first, speaking of that dream job of just like documenting all the wind damage stuff, there is a similar thing with aircraft, and specifically commercial aircraft engines. And it's this. Isn't there a place where a man's job is firing frozen chickens at airplanes to test engine strike? Yes. This is a thing. This is how they test resiliency for commercial airline engines, is they shoot frozen chickens into them.
That's
and
beautiful.
have to, like, the engine has to be able to function to a certain degree or for a certain amount of time, given a certain level of damage from literally a frozen chicken. Why would they need to be frozen? It's to make sure that it's heavy enough impact so that it doesn't just get ground up by the engine. It has to actually be a solid impact, because the other thing they're assessing is ice ingestion. So like if an airplane flies through a hailstorm, will the hailstones potentially like damage the fan blades and cause the engine to become inoperative?
Man, try to not fly through a hailstorm. That sounds like
definitely
a bad
try
time.
to not do that. But sometimes, this was more of a thing like earlier in commercial aviation. We weren't as good with the weather, and we didn't understand like stuff.
The intense updrafts in a hailstorm.
And that's caused a number of crashes of commercial. Is the microburst, where because you get you're flying into the headwind. So on approach, this is like a thing that happened, and I've been reading a lot about this because there's a blog that's all about this, really fascinating. And you get the headwind on approach as you're landing. If there's a headwind, then you have to decrease your engine power, right? So because you're trying to go down, and with the headwind, that increases your lift, so you go up instead. But then the problem is you come out the other side of the microburst, now you have a tailwind, and your lift collapses because your relative airspeed drops, and then they hit the ground before the runway. Because they lose lift. That happens like multiple times before they figured out how to solve the problem.
Wow.
That's
By
like
the way,
a thing.
Clifford the Alpha and Omega dog newsletters, there are absolutely planes that are outfitted to fly into storms, not just hurricane hunters, but like I've got friends that fly on these to do field campaigns and stuff. They're super cool. Yeah.
So let's talk about this gem right here. Dr. Willard Libby, the founder of the carbon-14 dating method, assumed this ratio to be constant. His reasoning was based on a belief in evolution, which assumes the Earth must be billions of years old. I don't even know where to start.
These 2 sentences are absolutely baffling, but let me start with the thought process that I believe this is starting with, right? Because lots of people who are young Earth creationists or in a more fundamentalist mindset with religion, right? View information, right? This is kind of the way they view information. You get information that is true from a human source who is a prophet, right? And anything that they say about the thing that they are a prophet of is the gospel truth, right? And so that took me a really long time to figure out, Dan, right? That took me a long time to figure out that that's what people are doing, because what they're trying to say is, oh, okay, if we want to disprove if we want to show that carbon-14 dating is incorrect, all we have to do is figure out who the prophet of carbon-14 is and show that they're a bad person, right? Like,
Right.
therefore they're scientific, right? Which is all kinds of logical fallacies.
Yeah, I mean, this
But-
is, Darwin was a racist, therefore
Right.
evolution is wrong. Like,
Exactly.
1, true, 2, irrelevant. But like,
Irrelevant,
you could
yeah.
see the,
It's this, right? So there is no founder, right? Like I you know what I mean? I don't think
yeah,
there
that's
is
such a
a
silly thing
founder
to say.
of
Yeah,
carbon-14, right? Like that
yeah,
seems silly. I'm certain there were
extremely
like
silly.
people who are really important in it, and I'm sure Dr. Libby's work was important. You know what I mean? I don't know who they are. I've never heard of them, and I know what carbon-14 is, right? Because science has no prophets, and we have no holy books, right? You get your information by other ways. It's not being disseminated from a prophet, right? Anywho, okay. So
Second sentence.
the second sentence, whether carbon-14 does not care about the age of the Earth because it cannot say anything about the age of a rock, right? And so, like, the most carbon-14 dating could possibly say is that, well, we found the remains of something that is about 100,000 years old, so the Earth has to be at least that old, right?
Right.
Like the biggest number carbon-14 could give you for the age of the Earth is 100,000, right? What could give you? It has to be at least that old. So,
which is still a problem for young Earth creationism.
right.
Doesn't say anything about the ultimate age of the Earth. There's
Right.
lots of other ways we do that, other radiometric methods that are independent of each other. We mentioned this before, how they're all within each other's error bars. But like this conflation of carbon-14 dating with the age of the Earth, they're two separate things. They're just not related to it. It's very frustrating.
Right. And so you need not make any assumptions about how old the Earth is in order to do a carbon-14 calculation. Right. And so I think that's as much as I want to dig into those two sentences, because that was just a lot
just
of
give you a
like,
headache. Well,
whoa.
let's a little palate cleanser before we go to the
Okay.
bottom of the page and on to the next page, because Savage Dreadnought Armored Schooner Cobra for $4.99 tells us that the big threat of ice ingestion is ice buildup on the inlet lip. It's why, how do you say that word? Nacelle? Nice. I don't know how to say that word. Cell? I don't know how to say that word. Sorry.
You don't watch enough Star Trek.
Yeah, I guess, sorry. It occurs to me that I've read that word a lot. Is that it? Okay. Heat valves are usually designed to fail on. Source, I fly a plane. That first-hand information right there. Thank you, sir. Or I shouldn't assume, but thank you. And then we have from Pibblepunk, half dog, half canine. First of all, folks, I just want to say I love the parenthetical joke in the name. I love it. Surprise stream, surprise super chat. Wish I could hang, but I'll have to wait for after work. Well, thank you for popping in. It is Wednesday, right? This is my normal time. This isn't a surprise time, right? Is it Wednesday? Did I do it at the normal time? It's Wednesday, right? Yeah, it's Wednesday. I did it at the normal time. I hope it's not a surprise. I tried it. I've been good this year. I'm doing it every week because, as we talked about earlier, my kids have gotten older, so I have it's more predictable. But Pibblepunk, thank you for being here and for your generosity. Let's look at the bottom of this page and on to the next page, folks. This has to do with the rate of carbon-14 formation and the rate of breakdown and how that affects the equilibrium point. We don't have to read every word, but this means if it takes 30,000 years to reach equilibrium and it's out of equilibrium, then maybe the Earth is not very old. This assumes, going back to something we talked about before, that there must be a constant amount of carbon in order to make this assessment, and that is not true. And Maddie explained why that is not true and how we know that is not true. So this thing right here,
how we account for it.
Yeah, right. So this doesn't make any sense. Like saying that there's one equilibrium point is like, in evolution, like, oh, there's one equilibrium frequency for this allele. Like, no, it fluctuates. It's not a constant thing.
Well, and let me give another example. The Earth is not in thermodynamic equilibrium with the sun, right? we don't have like net incoming energy equals net outgoing energy. That's not quite true, right?
Especially not true now, given all the extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Right.
Right? Like, yeah, it's like
right.
extremely not true.
However, well, I mean, like if you're talking like black body radiation, right? It's close, you know. And we're talking top of atmosphere, not surface. Anywho, but
True.
anywho, right? So like, but often when we're doing like astronomy, right, we assume that planets are in black body balance, black body equilibrium, right, thermodynamic equilibrium with their parent star, because that's close enough for what you can figure out with a telescope, right? And so carbon-14, it's like, when we're like, what I said, one of the assumptions we make is that like carbon-14 is like a constant planet wide, which is an equilibrium state. Assumptions are all bad.
See,
right?
There you go again.
Which is close enough to true for our calculations, right? Like, again, it's one of those things that's like, is it exactly true? No, the error is less than instrument error.
Yeah, so doesn't matter. Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
Bingo.
Gosh.
Okay. So now this one, and somebody in chat predicted that this was going to pop up earlier in this show. Somebody called it. You can see at the bottom of this page, talk about the magnetic field. The field has always been losing energy despite its variation, so it cannot be more than 10,000 years old. Let me tell you, when I started this chapter, I did not expect to get the magnetic field proves a young Earth, but here we are.
I was about to throw. I'm working on a prop for a Dungeons and Dragons character, and I have some cut up plastic skeleton pieces, and I was about to throw that across the room. Earth's magnetic field has not always been losing energy. That is not true. Okay, hold on. It is also not always freely decayed. So, okay, here's the thing, Dan, and maybe we couldn't do this in the 80s, right?
But here we are.
Here we are in the year of our Lord, 2024, and we're going to go to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Go with me there in your mind, okay?
Not in a billionaire's sub.
No, we don't need to go. You know what? We can go in a regular submarine and have a really strong magnet. How's that?
That works. We can do that.
Okay. Right. So we're in our U.S. Navy submarine, nuclear powered, makes its own air, very strong.
Very cool.
And it has a magnet, right? And this is not how you actually do this, team, but please enjoy my thought experiment for illustration. Okay, we're going to drive across from the east coast of the U.S. to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, okay? And as we go, we have our little magnet tool, and it's measuring the direction of the magnetic field of the rocks below us, okay? So what we're going to do is we go and it's pointing this way. Here, I'll do it like this, right? Green, this is going to be up. And then we go a little ways and it goes whoop and flips. And then we go a little ways and it goes whoop and it flips. And it goes a little ways and it goes whoop and it flips. And as we do this, we're tracing out about 200 million years of magnetic history of the Earth, right? So but based off of both dating methods and if the seafloor spreading is roughly constant, right? Close enough to constant.
Close enough.
Right? These two dates match up, then time zero is at the center of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and then rocks get older the further away you are from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, right? And it's about, the farthest away is about 200 million years old. Every, I think, order of magnitude, 100,000 years, which is wicked fast in geologic timescales, right? It might even be tens of thousands, but like, let's go with 100,000 years. It's not historic science if we can directly measure it today. Also, what is historic science? I know you're just trying to make me do this and get my emotional support, Batman. Off the shelf, but you're succeeding.
I'm sorry. I should have warned you just how bad this was going to be.
Yeah. But, okay, so what this is measuring is that the Earth's magnetic field flips every, let's just say 100,000 years, for fun, for a nice round number. And so and by the way, we're due for one, right? It should happen any day now.
That'd be so cool. Could you imagine being alive when it flips and all of a sudden
No.
everything is just backwards? That would be so
Everything
cool.
everything is backwards, but also all radio communication will just be gone for several years, right? Like maybe a few hundred, all radio communication is going to be gone, right? Because
We could probably
anyway,
figure
so the
that
Earth's
out.
magnetic field, but it doesn't just like what it does is the strength of the magnetic field decays, shuts off, and then reappears upside down. We don't know why this happens. At least when I learned about this in college 10 years ago, we didn't know why. We just know that it does. And so, okay, I think we have a true believer in chat.
Oh, we do. I was just going to
okay.
tell him to knock it off because we're not talking about like mutations and stuff tonight. We're doing atmosphere and carbon and stuff.
Mishka, carbon-14 isn't formed by nitrogen-14 absorbing a neutron. What happens, right, is that because you keep a total number of 14 nucleons, neutrons and protons in the nucleus, right? And so you don't add a neutron because that would be like carbon-15, right? You would get an extra neutron in there. So what happens to the nitrogen is that a proton in the nucleus of the carbon-14 absorbs the high energy gamma, and that is effectively so that gives that enough energy that proton is going to split into a neutron and an electron and a positron. So the proton turns into a neutron. It's an induced form of like beta decay. I'm not going to say beta plus or beta minus off the top of my head because whatever I say will be wrong.
Yeah.
So it's not absorbing a neutron. It's turning a proton into a neutron. Basically, you can make a neutron by squeezing together a proton and an electron. Anyway. Okay, but before that, I was talking about magnetic fields. Okay, cool. So we know that this is a process that happens. So since humans have been measuring the Earth's magnetic field, it has been decaying. So that is a true statement. And so we could maybe possibly give a little benefit of the doubt that when this was written, they might not have known
all the stuff that we now know.
All the stuff that we know now. Because paleomagnetism, which is studying Earth's past magnetic fields, is a relatively new field. Like, it might be like 20 years old. So,
fair. You know what? Look at us being so generous to AIG. We say, you know what? This one line might be an honest mistake.
Right. And I will say, the stronger the Earth's magnetic field is, the more harmful cosmic radiation gets bounced back off to space. So maybe that's why we're talking about it here. That, I don't know.
Yeah, because it has to do, because the carbon ratios would be different if you're getting more or
so
less
if you
radiation.
get more high energy radiation hitting the atmosphere, you can make more carbon-14, I think would maybe be the argument here.
Yeah, that's what they're going for. Okay. So they're talking about how it is fading, but then
what role might the Genesis flood have played in the amount of carbon?
None. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't, because if you compress all, I think as I was reading this, wait a minute, I think I can do this one, because if you have a body of carbon, right?
Yeah.
Organic stuff with certain ratios, if you compress however many years of that all together, the ratios haven't changed.
Correct. Because it's not a nuclear process.
Because you're just compressing it. It's not gonna you can't get like an artificially inflated age just by smushing it into a smaller air. Like, it doesn't.
Now, what they might
What
be
are
going
they doing?
for is this. So, like, there's a reason we don't date marine animals with carbon-14.
So again, I just want to be clear for everybody. AIG is lying. Maddie is being
Yes.
very generous and saying, here's the mistake they may be making.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because a
But let's
flood
tell what
burying
the
a bunch of
mistake they
plant
may be.
animal material doesn't affect the carbon-14 ratio. And having more carbon, right? Because they're saying here the biosphere just prior to the flood might have had 500 times more carbon in living organisms than today. That doesn't affect the ratio.
Doesn't matter. The ratio is the same.
So that doesn't dilute the amount of carbon
Yeah,
14, right?
that
That's
doesn't
not, no,
matter.
because it's the ratio that
Because
matters.
it's going to be generated at
Yeah,
whatever rate, and it's going to be absorbed at whatever rate.
right. Now, if we're talking about marine animals, so animals that eat things underwater, right?
Right.
The carbon that they're getting in their diets, right, isn't has to go through lots of steps before it gets to them, right? So carbon is going from the atmosphere, right, into say plants. Some is getting absorbed into the ocean, but what
Mhm.
gets absorbed into the ocean stays there for a long time, right? Carbon gets out of the ocean mostly by getting turned into rocks, right? So the carbon that is gets ingested in organic material by ocean living things is old compared to the carbon that's being ingested, compared to
Right.
like a long time has passed since that
You're
carbon atom was in the
you're going
atmosphere.
to have a lower ratio because
Yes.
that body of carbon that's locked up in the oceans is not being
Yeah.
exposed to the same radiation, so you're not generating carbon-14 at a comparable rate. So if you were to date it, you're going to get
Mhm.
an artificially old age.
Yes. So that's true of organisms that live in the ocean and eat things in the ocean and get their carbon from the ocean, not the atmosphere.
I don't think that's what they're talking about. I think you are being very generous because if you read the paragraph right before
Okay.
that, I don't think that's what they're talking about here at all. Folks, I think that is a great explanation for a very specific case. And if you
Yeah.
read this paragraph, I don't think that's what
Yeah.
AIG is talking about at
Well,
all.
okay, fair.
But
So I don't understand if this were the case, then
there
this
we go.
carbon-14 would have been, can you go back a page? Oh, sorry. Were distributed uniformly throughout the biosphere, then the total, so they're saying that there had to have been a constant amount of carbon-14, but that's not true.
But that's not true.
Right? That there's the same net amount of carbon-14 if there was 500 times more carbon in living or Earth's carbon budget in living organisms just before the flood than there is today, right? That doesn't change a ratio.
It doesn't change the rate. Right. There could
Doesn't
have been
change the
a more
ratio.
dense biosphere. There could have been a greater amount of biomass, but the
Right.
ratio doesn't
The
change. Yeah.
ratio does the ratio doesn't
Yeah.
change. That just means we have more carbon in living things than we do in rocks or in the
Right.
ocean,
Right. You're
right?
changing where the carbon is, but you're not changing the ratio of the isotopes in the carbon in the living things, which is what matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's no way to change that. So that's a very silly argument.
Yes.
And they don't, that's not even an argument because they're not proposing a mechanism for changing the ratio.
Yeah.
They're just saying if
Smushing everything really densely doesn't count.
right, it
Bef-
doesn't.
Before we move on, we got a super chat here from Rosina Autocatalytic Keller for 4.99. Didn't a recent study blame Theia for the two odd magma plumes, a giant impact origin for the first subduction on Earth? Yes. I remember this. This is the blobs in the mantle. They're
Oh,
saying the blobs are the remnants of the Theia impact, which is super cool.
that's super cool. And the Theia
Yeah,
impact being the impactor that made the
the
moon.
moon. Yeah,
Yeah, which is
yeah.
very, very, very cool.
So there's remnants of whatever that body was still kind of
Yeah.
I won't say intact, but there are fragments of it that are still
Do you
identifiable.
know
What's
why
that?
we think the moon was caused by a giant impact?
No, but I want you to tell me.
Okay, it is because the moon, the chemical composition of the moon is effectively identical to the chemical composition of Earth's mantle. Not the Earth as a whole.
How would it get
not
out?
our
Yeah.
crust,
The
just the mantle.
That's cool as hell.
Isn't
Yeah.
that cool?
So they're saying something had to hit the Earth and cause a giant plume of mantle to be ejected, and then that coalesced and it became the moon. That's so
Correct.
cool. That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is my favorite fact of the day.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Now, folks, we already talked about the flood stuff, so we're going to do the top of this page. But some of you may know, here we are, we're going to talk about the RATE project. So the point of the RATE project was to, as AIG tells it, gather data commonly ignored or censored.
Yes.
That's not what no. Just for anyone who's unclear how science works, the way you get famous and make a lot of money in science is by showing things that are different from what everybody else is showing and proving that you're correct. If you change a paradigm, if you show something new, that is how you make your name in science. You don't make your name in science by towing the party line that's boring and everybody wants to hype up their findings and show how they are different from what everybody else is saying.
If scientists are going to make an error, right? Like I always like to think about how systems are going to fail, right? So if a scientist is going to fail, they're going to fail on the side of overhyping their results.
Yep.
Right? And overstating how cool and unique and different their conclusions are. So you'll often hear people like Dan and I really trying to pull it in and making sure we don't do that, because that's where our systems, we know that flaw. We know that that's a flaw that we have because we want our pet theory to be true.
Right. You're always pushing back against that. And when you don't, you get things like there's a reason, like Maddie, I don't know if this is the case in the physical sciences, but in the life sciences, the journal Nature, two things with Nature. One, everybody wants to publish in Nature. Two, everybody laughs at Nature and thinks it's a crappy journal because they are just sensationalize everything well beyond the way it should. And they always have these cover stories that are like, wow, that's really amazing. And then it turns out like it's just wrong. And my favorite example of this is the bacteria that ate arsenic, the arsenic bacteria, which turned out to be a whole lot of nothing. And but it was like a whole big thing. And it's just like, you can't just get out ahead of your skis like that. You can't do it.
I just had a paper that I'm second author on rejected from Nature Geoscience. So
sorry, and also congratulations.
Thank you. Nature and Science, those two magazines have the highest impact factor, right? So if you have a paper published in one of those on your resume, you're a golden child and can get a job anywhere.
Okay, so let's talk about some of this rate stuff because there's a lot of highlighting on this page. So talking about fossilized wood samples,
it can't actually have been fossilized,
and that are so dated in other ways, right?
Okay, I guess it could have been fossilized.
So if it's this is like old. So this is 40 to 250 million year old fossilized wood specimens, dated with carbon dating to 30 to 45,000 years. And I just love the wording here. Detectable levels of carbon-14 that would conventionally equate to only 30 to 45,000 year ages for the original trees, right? God, there's so much. You can't do carbon dating on things
fossilized
that are fossilized.
Yeah.
You also can't do carbon dating on things you would never in a million years. If I had a thing that I had dated the strata in which it was embedded, and those strata were 40 million years old, right? And I used one of the techniques that allows you to do that with high confidence, right? And maybe I did too. I don't know, uranium, lead, and maybe I did like a strontium isochron. I don't know. Can you do that for 40 million years? I don't know.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know what the ranges are. But
whatever.
I did two techniques and they corroborated each other, said, okay, this formation is 40 million years old. Hey, I've got a sample here of fossilized wood. At no point would my next thought be, let's carbon date that sample.
Right.
That makes no sense.
I'm interested in when this study was done. Because my suspicion here is that if this was done, say, in the 60s, that 30 to 45,000 year age might have been the max that they could have gotten at that
They could have
time.
gotten, right? You're
Right.
bumping up against the instrumentation. Yeah.
I'm intrigued by what that is, right?
Well,
So
here,
like I don't know what they
that's
dated.
source 8. So
Yeah.
let's just, we don't have that many pages left. So let's just go over to source 8 here. This is
Oh,
19.
Snelling.
Oh,
Good.
it's well, there you go. It's Snelling from
Uh,
1997.
it's
Uh-huh.
in
Creation.
okay.
Yeah.
It's so that's not in
that's not
a
real paper.
that's not in a real paper.
Yeah, none of these are none of those are peer reviewed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not real. That is, folks. I mean, it was in the 90s, so it's a little bit tough to say this, but like that is a blog post masquerading as a journal is what's going on there.
Yeah. So yeah, fossil wood and ancient. So that there's so much of that I'm very suspect of. So one, this study was not
keep doing that.
Peer reviewed. If they had found that would have been accepted in a peer reviewed journal.
In a real journal.
Because that is a
groundbreaking result.
Right. Nature or Science would have accepted that in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
If their methodology was right, and anyone with a PhD in the sciences knows that.
Yeah. So if they could have published in a real journal, they would have raked in the dough. Yeah. Okay. So this is why you always check your sources, folks.
Yeah. So okay.
There's a little bit of a preview of the last thing they talk about there that you all just saw a picture of.
Yeah.
It's a good one. All right, it's classic. Okay, they also then, so in addition to the fake papers about the wood, they also did coal. They carbon dated coal.
That seems dumb.
Which, so coal dated from all different. Now, do we have a reference for this? I don't even see a reference for this one. There should be no detectable carbon. Yeah, after 100,000 years. Okay. Where is the reference?
There's not
10.
one.
10? I guess this maybe?
Let's take a look. Yeah, let's take a look.
Oh, no, that's diamonds. Right? Oh, no, the picture is there, but I think 10 should be the coal.
Okay.
So let's look at 10. Okay, so let's go back. Origins, not a real. Nope, not real. That's fake.
Okay, but
Origins.
That's 9.
Again, not real.
But yeah, because
you have to have like
go down a page because 9 is in Origins, but 10 is
same.
That's Origins. J.R. Ibid.
I think just the same as the previous.
Oh, okay. So that's Origins. So, but can you go back up and let's read that coal for a second?
Yeah.
Because by the way, coal radioactive.
Oh
right?
yeah, let's go back this way.
Yeah.
So that's going to throw off everything. If there's radioactivity, then that's going to mess with it because how do we get carbon-14? Radio absorbing things. So and then it decays.
What can happen, right, is that if there's any nitrogen-14 in the coal, right, and there's radioactivity going on, so you have those high energy gammas, then you can then make carbon-14 locally. But like again, it's not a good citation. So
it's a fake. It's not a real paper. Nobody has actually confirmed these results outside of the creation community. And again, if they're real, should be able to confirm them using conventional methodology, conventional scientists. Like
exactly. And again, that would get published in a heartbeat.
In a heartbeat.
It would, right?
I mean, folks, you all see this with I do all the life science stuff, and you all see this all the time with like, oh, this specimen overturns human evolution, earliest human fossil, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's all about the things that make the headlines are the things that overturn the paradigm. 99% of the time when you see one of those headlines, it's wrong. Yeah. But this is the kind of thing that if it could get published in a legit journal, would get one of those headlines. There's no reason to not do it unless you can't do it.
Right. I remember, here's a good example. I remember when I was in college, I was an undergrad, and there was some excitement. There was some excitement going around because some folks at the Large Hadron Collider thought that they had observed thought that they had changed the speed of light. Right.
I think I remember when that happened.
And they were like, the team, right, was going through all of their machinery, all of their methodology, and they were like, okay, listen, we know this can't be right, but we can't find what's wrong.
Right.
Right. And a draft paper was sent around, right? And of course, I was at MIT, so like
People were like,
we got a hold of it, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
undergrads got a hold of the paper, and if you're wondering what being an undergrad at MIT is like, this is what we were all excitedly huddled over printed out copies
Yeah,
of this paper, talking about it over dinner. So MIT is exactly what you think it is. It was a great time, but like reading the paper, the vibe was, oh man, listen, this can't be right. We know it's not right. But if it is, I want my name on this paper.
But if it is,
right?
It's the coolest thing ever. Yeah, right.
It's the coolest thing ever. But we know it can't be right, but it's the coolest thing ever. Right. And so and they ended up figuring out what it was. There was one place in the machinery where a calculation was wrong. And by the way, that was found by sending this draft out for peer review.
Yeah,
right?
Everybody combed. You literally
Everybody
had,
combed
the
through it.
entire community being like, let's figure this
Right.
out, with the acknowledgement that if it was correct, we got to rewrite everything.
We know about
folks.
Physics goes out the window.
We gotta change it. Yeah.
And that would be so cool, right? Like, that's the vibe. So
people want weird stuff like that to happen. That's the coolest thing.
Yeah, my point being, if any of the stuff they were talking about is real, right, and was done with honest methodology, even honestly mistaken methodology, the scientific community would be so excited to read it, right?
Yep.
Because we're all just nerds.
It's fun. It's cool. We want new things that are cool. Yeah. So the last little bit in here is the bit on diamonds.
Yeah.
Carbon-14 and diamonds. And now the thing is with carbon-14, as Maddie explained earlier, is that carbon-14 and carbon dating works when you are dating the time of death for living things that have incorporated atmospheric carbon.
Yes.
Diamonds, notably,
not alive, turns out.
Not alive. And we're not alive at any point. Like, they just not living.
Alive.
That's not the same. That's not organic carbon that was fixed from the atmosphere into a living system. That's not where the diamond came from. That's a different thing. This, like, they know this. Like, they know.
They have to know this.
They know, right?
You know.
They know what they're doing.
Listen, I explained this on a YouTube video, right? And to be clear, like, I'm speaking outside my field here, so I am only talking about information that is so well established and so well known, it is in textbooks, right? Like
the baseline level for science knowledge is what's in the textbooks. The textbooks are reliably a decade behind what's going on in the field, if not more, and they're going to simplify it a lot.
So the textbooks are where textbooks fail, right? Is that they might be out of date, right? Right. So we might have had new information that's important, but generally, if information makes it into a textbook, it's real reliable. Especially like college level is generally what I'm talking about, because sometimes when you get stuff written down for like kiddos,
you really gotta check the sources on those books.
You gotta check the sources.
Yeah, sources.
But sorry, I like zoned out for a second. Yeah, so you cannot use carbon-14 to date a diamond, because it was never alive and it never ate plants. It didn't eat. If it doesn't eat anything or do photosynthesis, you can't date it with carbon-14 dating. So, second thing in here, should there be any carbon-14 in a diamond? Like, not measurable, unless it was like, well, I don't know. How does anybody know how you make artificial diamonds, now that I think about it?
I mean, I know very vaguely it involves putting, I don't even know what the precursor molecule is, but then what is it? Do you know the precursor?
No.
No, it just involves, so it's a thing in a lab, or they call it
Yeah.
a lab. I guess more of a factory though, but
But it's like compression,
yeah,
right?
it's heat and compression. Yeah.
Okay. So I suppose, right, if you went outside, let's pretend this is how you make a diamond in a factory. We go outside, we dig up some ash from a campfire, because
Yeah.
that's got a lot of carbon in
It's
it,
got carbon.
right? Purify that, get everything that's not carbon out of it,
All the impurities. Yeah, you
all
gotta
the
get rid of it.
impurities, get that out, and then we go smash, right?
Which
Um,
takes time.
yeah, which takes time and heat and whatever have you, but that won't affect how much carbon-14 is in it, right? And oh my gosh, look, now we have a diamond. Does that diamond have carbon-14 in it? Sure does, right? So anywho, so the rate group was, they found carbon-14 in diamonds, right? So
Here's
it matters, man, does it matter if that was artificially or naturally done? And I don't know the answer to that.
well, that's so the one of the papers that they used to say there's carbon-14 in diamonds was a calibration study for a particular lab's instrumentation. They were like, what is our background level in this machine?
Yeah.
Here's a diamond that we know has no organic carbon in it, right? So we're going to put the diamond in the machine. We're going to take the reading.
Yeah.
And we're going to say, okay, that's our baseline error for this machine, right? And because it was not zero, young Earth creationists then turn around and be like, oh, I got it. There it is. And that's
how we measure instrument error, my guy.
Yeah.
Like, no instrument is
You
perfect.
put a blank sample in there. It's no different from putting like your distilled water in a spectrophotometer when you're doing your this is what I would do with my bacterial growth curves, right? You do the opacity.
Oh gosh, here's what it's like, right? You've had your coffee pot for 10 years, right? And you're like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna clean my coffee pot. So I'm gonna put pure distilled water right out of a jug into my coffee pot and hit brew. And oh my gosh, coffee grounds are in here. What comes out? I must have put coffee. There must have been coffee grounds in my distilled water. That it's the same argument.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to use that from now on. I like that one a lot. This diamond thing, it's infuriating. It's so like, they know, like, this is one of those ones you read it and you go like, they know better.
Yeah.
They know better. All right, so that brings us to the end of the chapter here. It was a mix of like, you have to assume the Bible is true, and here's some really bad arguments for why carbon dating is not reliable, and like painfully bad arguments.
Right.
And then we like that is the end. So what's the next topic that I have lined up here? I don't even know. Could God really have created it? And it's Ken Ham. Oh goodness, the next chapter is going to be a trip. So folks,
here's the game for the next chapter. Okay. I want you to do like a Control F and replace.
God
with wizard, right? And if you can do that, and it's the content is unchanged, right?
I like
then
that.
It's dumb. That's my conclusion.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
All right. I am going to, while we wrap this up, I'm going to take the screen share down because we don't need to look at the book to wrap this up. So let me just first I want to thank everybody for being here, for hanging out. There's like 70 people here at various, there's 69 people here right now. We're in the 70s before. This is great. People were here for almost 2 hours. There were digressions. Thank you all for being here and participating. I appreciate all of you. Second thing, thank you, Maddie, so much, Dr. Maddie, so much for being here and helping me out with this chapter. Because like, I didn't know any of this stuff. And so you're the perfect person to experience this with me.
I deeply appreciate that I didn't have to read this beforehand. I did enjoy live reacting.
That is some of my favorite things, are just like, we're just gonna do it cold and just see, like, watch people's jaws as they see how bad the arguments are. So Maddie, tell us what, if anything, you have on deck. I know you've been really busy, but you have been making the rounds. You know, you were with Dapper doing Matt with Maddie. You're here, which I love. Just seeing you in all the places. So what, do you have any other things coming up, your channel, elsewhere?
I don't, so I'm on Dapper's channel for Matt with Maddie the third Tuesday of every month. That's probably the next thing I have like planned in stone. Wanting to get some of the science team together to, I think we should all come up with our answers to that homework problem.
That would be a great one to do. Yeah.
And maybe promote registering to vote is
Oh man, we should all do rounds of election stuff. You're totally right. We should all just do, we should 100% do that. Yeah. That's a great idea. That is a legitimately great idea. And now I'm thinking in, September and October, do it. What can I, Oh, I love it.
We might need to do
I have some
that.
weekends in October or I have some days in October we got to do. We could totally do. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I will say, so I've been directing my creative and video energy juices towards actually working on a TTRPG show.
Nice.
So it's going to be a long while before that ever comes out, but we've been filming with some like local actors out here, and I've got oh my gosh, I've got 2 full story arcs filmed, and I'm working on the editing. So that's kind of what I'm working on behind the scenes. Because I do too much science in my real life. And so I got to have a creative break.
Yeah, that definitely 100%. You got to have that outlet. This is why I have, for example, a shelf full of fantasy novels and an office full of Legos. Like this is, you gotta.
Yeah, that's why
you gotta do that.
I've been, please enjoy. I've been knitting this chainmail shirt.
Nice.
Because you can, in fact, there's a knit stitch that looks like chainmail.
Looks like chainmail. That's super cool.
Because it's so much lighter. So I'm working on a costume for my dwarf Tempest cleric.
Nice. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining me for this one. For my channel, as all of you know, every Wednesday we're trying to do it. It's August. We're so far so good. We're not going to jinx it. But I've got a few really fun things lined up for the next few weeks here. So next week, I have another guest for a live show that's going to be on the 28th of August. If you are a fan of Bad Science Sunday, Maya is going to be joining me. We are going to be talking about not just rebutting misinformation, disinformation, but ridiculing it and the kind of making fun approach for all of these things. And there's a really nice dovetail here that just happened to work out with the ongoing weird discourse that's going on. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that stuff a bit. And I'm really excited. That is next week. Maya, you know her from Bad Science Sunday. She was in the chat before. Maya, if you're still here, I can't wait. And I'll have links for you that you can share, soon. And then coming up on September, I have to get the date right. I think it's September 18th. Dr. Jay Bundy will be joining me, and we are going to talk. Well, we're going to talk about a bunch of things. He's going to then come back on later on. We have like a bunch of things that we're planning to do. But the first thing we're going to do is way back earlier in the summer when we did that long stream on Guts of Gibbon with Erica, the long fundraising stream. We bonded for a moment over graphic design and making figures and maximizing your use of ink. You're having a very high ratio of information to ink. So what we are going to go through the worst creationist figures we can find and talk about graphic design and science communication and illustrate one more way that creationists are bad at what they do. And I'm really super excited for that one. That one's going to be like really fun, but also I think really informative. And then somewhere in there, and I don't have a date on this yet, but I'm going to get some people together. Maddie, you're going to get an invite for this one. I just haven't nailed things down yet. We're going to talk about that CMI article on how to debunk conspiracy theories, because my friends at Creation Ministries International, the call is coming from inside the house.
Oh no!
So yeah, we're gonna talk about that, because that one, science friends need to talk about that one. So that one, I don't have a date on that one. September or October, that's going to happen. I'm really excited for that. And then as Maddie just suggested, we're totally on this channel. Maddie, you do stuff too, but we are totally going to do election stuff. We'll do voter stuff. We got to do that. That's an important thing. So I think that's where we're going to leave everybody. Before you go, remember to tip the wait staff. And, oh, wait a minute. Hang on. I got one more super chat there right at the end. Before we go, hang on. There was one more from Christine V for $2. Thank you, both of you. I learned lots of cool things. Thank you. thank you for being here. Thank you for your generosity. And one more time, thank you to Dr. Maddie, because I also learned really cool things tonight. And that always makes me happy. So with that, everybody, I hope you all have a great night. Stay safe. There is a ongoing significant COVID outbreak in North America right now. So stay safe. And when the new round of vaccines comes out, make sure you get your updated COVID and flu vaccine, because flu season is coming too. So stay safe out there, everybody. Have a great night. I will see you all next week. Bye.